For tonight, I wanted to spend one more week just sort of reviewing some of the assignments and going over an example with you in order to, for a couple of reasons. One is just this section of the process is a really important section where we looked at a diagram last week in detail, and this week we'll look at a couple more things, but I wanted to review them. And then if you have any questions, I want to make sure that I can answer them as best I can, either just generally about what we're covering or specifically about your passage. If there's something in your passage that is a challenge for you, I want to help you with that. So use that time this time right now, we can do that. And then also too, just to let you know, next week, I'll be meeting with the brothers in Pakistan at this time. So we won't have a meeting next week, but the following week, which will be, get the date here. Let's see, October 5th, we will be starting the 4th unit. So we'll be moving from the exegesis part to the exposition part and talking about putting a sermon together, about what are key elements in that process, how to do that, and then how to preach that sermon and look at some important aspects of preaching. So we're going to move from the study part, the exegesis part, to the communication part, the exposition. So that'll be starting in 2 weeks. Unit 4. Okay, so you can next week we'll be off. I don't know, Joshua, if you want to if you and Philip want to conduct a discipleship lab or not. Maybe that you could do that. I know you had one just a couple weeks ago, but that might be a good opportunity next week to do that. So, but as far as the class goes, we won't be having the class since I'll be teaching a group of brothers in Pakistan. And you could keep them in your prayers. Several of them live in the north, near the border of Afghanistan, and they are a number of refugees. Our brothers and sisters in the Lord from Afghanistan have been coming into Pakistan for safety, which, right, it's bad if you're running to Pakistan for safety. So, but many brothers and sisters are being persecuted and even killed in Afghanistan. And so the churches, particularly in northern Pakistan, they're mostly underground, meet in secret, and they're trying to take in these refugees, but they have to be careful when they do that. And they don't have much to provide by way of help as far as food and clothes and those things. So please be praying for them. I know things are very difficult for you brothers in Myanmar. They're also a great challenge in Afghanistan right now, in Pakistan as well. So let's, if we can, remember them in prayer. So the Lord's provided opportunity for me to be able to interact with the pastors and do some training with them each month or so. And so I'll be doing that next week for a few days. So if you could pray for that time as well, I would appreciate it. So with that, let me go back to the notes here. Okay. So yeah, again, the goal of the session, I wanted to look at a couple of assignments, as much as we can get through in the next hour and a half or so. And then again, if you have any questions, please ask. All right, don't hesitate. The goal here isn't just to get through the lecture notes. The goal is to make sure you understand. And so if you have any questions, let me know. Now, last time we gathered together, we focused our attention on the 4th step, the block diagramming the passage. We looked at Philemon 4 to 7 in detail and just walked through the process for that diagram. And that was assignment 3.3, which is to to diagram your Colossians passage, but we looked at Philemon 4-7 as an example. And what I want to do, Lord willing, tonight, is to look at that next step, textual observations of the passage. Because again, these two steps, 4 and 5, are really the grammar part. All that time and suffering and agony we went through looking at the grammar is really to help us with those two steps, because as with any language, the biblical authors used grammar in order to construct their phrases and clauses in order to communicate what they wanted to tell us. And so we really need to understand how grammar works in order to be able to interpret what they were saying. Obviously, this is all under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. But as we know, the Holy Spirit blesses diligence, not laziness. So we want to be diligent in trying to understand as best we can what the grammar does, and then in that help us to see what the author is doing and depend on the Spirit to give us understanding as we go through that process. And so the block diagram is the first part of that. And then the second part is then taking that diagram and examining it carefully, looking specifically for certain things, all right, of the passage. Again, the first step, we make observations and that read and observe, but that's at a book level. In step 5, our observations are specific to our passage, and they are very specific kinds of observations. All right. And you can go back to, I think, session 3.4 for details on that, but I'll try to do a review and then we'll look at an example passage together from Philemon. So again, after completing the diagram, we want to carefully observe our passage and focus on some specific kinds of connections, kinds of words, kinds of grammatical features. The primary one being the verbs. All right, verbs drive the action. They move the thoughts forward. And so there were 3 main characteristics of the verb that we talked about. This is in English, the tense of the verb. And in English, there are really 3 primary tenses, right? Past, present, future. Now in Greek, I think there are, 7 tenses in Greek, but it's the same idea that these tenses carry a certain with them either when the activity took place or in what manner. And then mood we had where we discussed the mood of the verb. It's the imperative, which is a command, right? The indicative, which is a statement. The interrogative, which is a question. And then we have what we called the subjunctive. That was the mood of uncertainty. All right, that it may happen, it should happen. So we aren't, imperative is the mood of command, right? Do this. The indicative is the statement, the mood of statement. So this happened. The interrogative is the question, will you do this? And then the subjunctive is he might do this. All right, so those are the 4 moods. There is another mood, the conditional mood. But these are the 4 that we focused our attention on. And then finally, the voice, which we looked at. There are active or passive. And again, an active voice is the subject doing the action. All right, I kicked the ball. Passive is the subject is having the action done to it. All right, so active would be, an example would be, I kicked the ball. Passive would be, the ball as the subject was kicked by me. Here the verb was kicked is passive. Normally passive verbs will have a verb of being in front of it, like be, is, was, will be. Active is the subject doing the action. I kicked the ball. All right. So these are key, the understanding what the verbs are doing in the passage. You need to know, is this a command being given or is it a statement? Is it a question? That makes a difference. When God when God gives a statement, that's different than when God gives a command, right? When he gives a command, you better do it. When he gives a statement, he's declaring something. And so it's important we understand the difference. Or if it's in the subjunctive mood, that's telling you that the action may or may not happen. There's some uncertainty attached to it. All right, so that's an important feature to understand. All right, any questions on that? Again, hopefully that's a review. We'll look at these and when we look at the example more detail. Then the next thing to be paying attention to, looking for in your passage, is to identify the pronouns. All right, and it's not just noting, in English, the pronouns he, she, they, I, we, us, those are first person. He, she, they, those are third person. You, your, that's second person. All right, those are not just being able to see the pronouns, but importantly, what is the pronoun connected to? Again, a pronoun points to a noun. It refers to a noun. And so in some passages, it's very important we're following to whom is being, for example, we just read Matthew chapter 5 here. All right, look at the first two verses. Tangian, I'm going to ask you, these first two verses, what are the pronouns here? Just verses 1 and 2.
Verse 1 to he.
Okay, we have, he, and that refers to, who's that referring to?
Jesus.
Yes, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain.
And after Jesus sat
Yes,
down, his the disciple of Jesus Christ came to Jesus.
yes,
And verse 2, Jesus opened, and his mouth is Jesus. And then to teach them mean the disciples. Verse 1.
yes. So that's an important thing to notice, that the primary audience of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 is the disciples. All right. Certainly, there are crowds as well around. Jesus saw the crowds, but the nearest antecedent, that is the nearest word, as the disciples. But obviously, the crowd is there too, so they are hearing this as well. But it is important to be able to identify the pronouns in a particular passage so that you know who specifically is being referred to. So that's the second step. It's not just noting all the pronouns, it's also identifying what they refer to. Can you guys see my on the screen, by the way, the text on the right and the notes on the left? Okay. So pronouns, also very important. Conjunctions. Now, we already identify those when we are doing the block diagram, but it's good to go back and take a look, remind ourselves. Again, we have the two kinds of conjunctions that you noticed in the block diagram. The first is the coordinating, right? That was the and, boy, and, nor, but, or, and yet. And then we had the coordinating ones. Remember, they join two words, phrases, or clauses that are equal grammatically. And then subordinating, excuse me, we had a number of those, for, since, that we tried to memorize, so that, when, while, where, though, although. So we had several of these that we looked at, and those, remember, introduce a dependent clause that is subordinate to another word in the sentence. All right, it connects to unequal grammatical words, phrases, or it connects actually a clause to a word or a phrase. So we want to go through the passage and again identify or note those conjunctions and what they're doing. All right. And part of that, as I said, we do when we do the diagram, but it's good to take a look. Now, another very important observation that we want to pay attention to is words that are repeated, and not just the same word, but synonyms as well. Now, as we look at this passage that Joshua read to us, the Sermon on the Mount, do you see any words that are repeated? There's one that's repeated quite often, right?
Blessed.
Blessed, yeah. Notice verse 3, right? Verse 4, blessed, blessed. Verse 5, blessed. Verse 6, blessed. Do you think there's an emphasis here? Is Jesus focusing attention on something? Certainly, at least in the first part, these first verses 3 to 11, the focus is definitely on blessed. So you'd want to note that. Now, there are also, it's helpful to not just look for the same word, but also if you see any synonyms in a particular passage. That is, those words that don't mean exactly the same thing, but they are similar in meaning. All right, so here, like, for example, verse 12, rejoice, be glad. Those are two different words, but they carry a similar idea. Okay, and so we want to note if you see a word repeated or their synonyms, then take note of that. That will be pointing, the author is using those to emphasize. And again, Jesus obviously is emphasizing this idea of being blessed. And then rejoice and be glad could be connected to that. All right, it's the idea of blessed, the person who's blessed. Okay, so look for repetition. That's very important. Contrasts, and that we will see most likely when we find the word but in there, a contrast. I don't know, let's see if there's one in, okay, here's a contrast. You're the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? So the contrast between being salty and not being salty. All right. The contrast of hiding a lamp or putting it on display. All right, is there as well. So look for contrasts in your text as well. Now, again, not every passage will have a contrast, but certainly many will. So if you don't see any, that's fine. Just note that there aren't any. Same with the next one, comparisons. Look for ideas, individuals, items that are compared to each other. All right. So here is a comparison between you and being the light of the world. He's describing believers need to be a light. They're compared to a light. Now, what does a light do? Right? It makes things visible. It shines on things. It exposes things. And so that's what we are to be, lights to of the Lord, right? Let our light shine in such a way, meaning, you know, the light that God has put within us. And so here we see some comparisons that Jesus is making. And then the next one is any lists that you see. And again, a list would be, you know, three or more items. We could say that here in verses 3 to 11 is a list of the kinds of people that are blessed. Those who are poor in spirit, those who mourn, the gentle, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We could describe that as a list. Okay. Any questions so far? I don't want to just speed through this. Everyone following okay? I know this is riveting. I know this is the most interesting thing you've ever heard, but you know, so try to hold back your excitement here. But I think it's important that we do look for these specific things when we're studying. Some of them could be significant, but sometimes they may not be. But that's okay. One of the key principles we're trying to teach or remind you guys of as we go through these classes together, as we go through how to study the scriptures, is recognizing that when you're looking at a passage, you want to look at it from different perspectives, or look at it looking for certain specific things, different things. So that's why we have the step where we do the diagram. That's looking for specific, how do these phrases and clauses connect together? In this step, we're looking at the passage from another point of view, and that is, okay, let me examine some of these grammatical details, very specific ones, to see that. Earlier, we did background context in order to understand the setting of the passage. So we're looking at that from a different point of view, looking for something else. We then talked about the contextual flow. That is, how do each paragraph fit together, and how does my passage connect to the author's flow of thought? Later, there's the step where we do word studies. So we're looking at individual words. So all of these steps are examining our text from a different perspective, if you will, or looking for something a little bit different in each of those steps. And when you do all of them together, that is what gives us a greater understanding of the passage. If you just do one thing, okay, I'm just going to do word studies. All right, here's my passage that I'm going to teach or preach. So I'm just going to do word studies of every word. Well, okay, that will help a little bit, but you're not getting the full, you're not examining the passage from every possible angle. Or if you just said, okay, I'm going to preach this passage, so I'm just going to consult resources. Okay, well, again, that will help a little bit, but then all you're going to be doing is getting, the opinions of others on that passage. So that can be helpful, certainly, but that's not the only thing you want to do. And so each of these steps are intended to help us focus on the passage from a certain perspective or point of view, looking for particular things. And so when you do all of them together, when you do the background context, when you do the contextual flow, when you do the diagram, the textual observations, word studies, consult resources, look for the author's, the exegetical idea, the author's what, why, how, all of those together provide us with the opportunity to glean, to understand what the passage is saying. And so, as we look at this textual observations and you're looking for pronouns, you may be tempted to, what am I doing? I'm just looking for pronouns. Well, yeah, but you might get an insight, like, for example, from the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, oh, I don't know if I ever thought about that Jesus was primarily speaking first to his disciples there. And again, of course, the crowds would hear as well, but that can be a helpful insight, that if you weren't really paying specific attention to the pronouns, you may not have seen that before. And so each of these steps, and in this case, this step of textual observations, is forcing us to study, look at the passage from a specific, or for looking at some specific aspects of the text. All right. It's the idea of kind of like a detective, when he looks at a crime scene, he has to look for, he doesn't just look where the blood is, if say somebody was injured, right? He looks at a lot of other things. He might find a little scrap of paper, or he might see some smudge on a wall, or he might see a footprint on the ground, or right, he might notice a particular smell. Maybe the criminal had a certain smell to him, or right, he's looking for all different kinds of things, not just one specific thing, because as he examines all the different things at the crime scene, and even more than the crime scene, right, he might then get on the computer and look at for he might try to do a search for a certain kind of person, or look on video camera evidence to see if somebody was in the scene at a particular time. So there's all these different things that the investigator will examine to uncover, to figure out the crime. And the Bible's, I don't mean to compare it to a crime, but I think you get the idea, is that we're examining this passage in many, many, many different ways, because these will all help us to uncover what the author is doing. Okay, well, I don't mean to belabor that point, but I just want to, I know at times when you go through these steps, it can seem very tedious and time consuming and might seem unimportant. And so I want to just encourage you that maybe that one specific step doesn't unfold everything in the passage, but certainly that step, along with this one and this one and this one, all together will help us to see the meaning, the author's intended meaning, much better. Okay? Any comments on that? Does that make sense? Okay. I don't know, Joshua, do you have any thoughts about that as well? Just the importance of doing, as you study, doing a lot of different things. Anything come to your mind as well? No?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. All right. So lists. So as you look at the passage, see if you can find any lists there. Then cause and effect. Now, there is a cause and effect in this passage in Matthew chapter 5, especially in the Beatitudes, these first verses. Anybody see that? Any examples of cause and effect? That is one thing bringing about a result or another thing. All right, let me ask, I'll just call on somebody then. Norman, how about you? Do you see any cause and effect in these first several verses in the Beatitudes here?
If you look, if you look at it, it's saying, it's talking about, it says poor in spirit. The result is there's the kingdom of heaven. Is it right for me to say that?
Yeah, good. There's an example, right? The verse 3. Yeah. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for, and that's the key word there, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So words like before or because tell us cause and effect. So the cause essentially is the person who's poor in spirit. The effect, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. All right. And you see another example here, Norman?
Yeah. In every verse there is one actually.
Yes.
Like for example, verse 4, those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Mourning and being comforted.
Yes. Good. Yeah, and you're exactly right. Notice Jesus gives a cause and effect in each of these first 9 verses. And even in verse 12, there's a cause and effect. Rejoice and be glad because your reward in heaven is great. So another effect of being persecuted in verse 11. So that's something to keep in mind. So then the word, looking for words of the word for or because or as a result, those all would indicate this cause and effect. Okay. They don't always, right? Because here, verse 12, it says, for in the same way they persecuted. That's not a cause and effect. That's giving a reason. But these other words for in verses 3 through 10 are showing a cause and effect. All right. Okay. Good. Thank you, Norman. Now, purpose result. This is actually, I really should combine this with number 8. But sometimes you get the words so that, or in order that. These indicate a reason for a particular statement being made. Let's see, do we have any? Yeah, okay. Verse 16, there's one here. Let your light shine before men in such a way that, or so that, they may see your good works. So there's a purpose. Why should we let our light shine? So that they would see our good works and glorify our Father. Okay? So verse 16 is one example of this, a purpose statement or a result. Okay? And then conditional clauses, that's basically condition, right? Is if then, if this, then that. So notice there is one here. If the salt, verse 13, has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? There's an example of a condition. All right. It can't be made salty if the salts become tasteless. Or he asked the question, really, if this happens, how can it be made salty again? So there's an example of a conditional clause. So there's a lot of these in this passage. All right, and then figures of speech, that would be more of just any statement that is made that's not literal. Let's see. So yeah, for example, figure of speech, you are the light of the world. Now, is he saying that we are literal lights? That we have some light coming out of us, a literal light? Obviously, that's not what he's referring to. He's speaking of light in a different sense, that we are displaying the light of the Lord, or should. All right, and so he uses this figure of speech, let your light shine before men. That is our example, our deeds, our actions. Here he's describing them as light. Okay, because notice he says in verse 16, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see what? Your good works. So here he gives an explanation of our light is the good works that we do that reflect Christ. Okay. So look for figures of speech. Now, when we do poetry, later on, when we look at the poetic genre, there's going to be a lot of figures of speech that we're going to study. But even in epistles or even in the Gospels, there are examples of that. You are the salt of the earth. Again, he's not saying we're literally salt, but there's a way in which we are like salt. Okay, that we have an effect on the world around us. Okay, so look for figures of speech and more importantly, not just finding them, but what are they referring to? Okay, questions? All right, and finally, identify any words in the passage that convey tone. Emotional terms. So for example, in this passage, right, the repetition of blessed, rejoice and be glad, there's this tone of encouragement, right? These are encouraging statements Jesus is making. All right. Okay, so that's just a review. Those are the things you want to look for when you're doing textual observations of a passage, all right? And again, I do this after the block diagram because I've already really thought about a lot of these as I'm doing the diagram. So then after I finish the diagram, I think I'll be able to more quickly see these specific details and observations, all right? Questions on this? All right. So let's do this. We've looked at this passage before. I've kind of been using it as our vehicle. We looked at the diagram of this text last week, and in fact, here it is, the one that we came up with last week. What I'd like to do is now just use this as an example. This is what you would do in your assignment. After you've diagrammed your Colossians passage, then you're going to go back and look at that text and do these textual observations. And so what I'd like to do is, let me pull up. Where is that? All right. Okay, I have Philemon over here on the right side of your screen. And what I like to do is we'll read have one of you guys read the passage together, and then we'll just go through and make observations, okay? So I think let me do this. Let's see. I'm going to ask Zali, you could read the passage for us. Read Philemon 4-7. And then as he's reading, guys, just try to start taking note of the different things in the passage, the textual observations we want to make, okay? So Zali, if you don't mind, could you please read for us verses 4-7? Good afternoon, by the way.
Okay. Sure, yeah. Colossians chapter 1, verse 4-7. I thank my God always when I remember you in my prayers, because I hear of your love and of the faith that you have towards the Lord Jesus and for all the saints. And I pray that the sharing of your faith may become effective for the full knowledge of every good thing that is in us for the sake of Christ. For I have derived much joy and comfort from your love, my brother, because the heart of the saints have been refreshed through you.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so let's take a look at this, and let's just make some observations here. We'll Shulong, I'm going to start with you, and we just want to look at verbs. Okay, so and we'll just go verse by verse. So if we look at verse 4, just identify the verbs that you see, and then identify their 3 main characteristics. All right, so for example, I'll do the first one. Thank. This is verse 1. Okay, thank is the verb. I thank my God, and that the tense is present. He's doing I presently thank my God, and the mood is indicative. He's making a statement. All right, and then the voice is active. The subject, Paul, is doing the action. Okay, so Shulong, are there any other verbs in verse 4, not verse 1, that you see, and what are their characteristics?
The next word that has the same characteristic is remember.
Okay.
Yeah. When I remember you in my prayers. So remember.
Okay, good.
Remember.
And what are the 3 characteristics?
Okay, it is present tense.
Yes, good.
Indicated and active.
Okay, so it's the same as the verb thank. All right, good. Any other verbs in verse 4?
It's verse 5 already.
Okay, so verse 5.
Yeah, it's because I hear of you here. Okay.
Okay. All right.
I
and
hear
what?
that is also the the present tense, okay, indicative and active.
Yeah. Okay, good. Any
And
other verbs in verse 5?
and the other verse that's okay, that's it, that you have, this is B part. Okay, from the B part that you have
Have.
two words. Okay, have.
Have, yeah.
Okay, you have two words. This you have is also the present tense and active and indicated.
All right, good. You're on a roll. Let's keep going. Verse 6.
Verse 6, and I prayer. That is sharing the prayer. So the prayer, the verb is present tense also, and okay, also indicative and active.
All
Okay,
right, these
that
are
is
verbs.
sharing of the verb may become effective. Okay, the may become the it is present tense, and it is not indicative, but this is subjunctive
Yes. How do you know that?
because it may, because it's uncertain.
Yeah, notice the word may there. In English, may or might or should will indicate this uncertainty. All right. He's asking, he's praying and hoping that his faith might become effective. All right. It's not a certainty. So very good. So it's subjunctive. Very good.
And active.
Yes, active. Your
For
faith may become.
for the full knowledge of every good thing that is okay, state being, this is active and present tense, active in indicated in us for the sake of Christ. Okay, is the verb.
Good. All right.
Okay, next.
Verse 7. Yeah.
Okay, for I have derived. Okay, I have derived. This is participle. This is present participles or present perfect.
Yeah. So it's a present. It's yeah, technically a perfect tense, but we would call that here. I just want to simplify it to past tense. It's something that has happened.
Yeah.
I have derived much
I
joy.
have
So this is
derived.
something that's taken place in the past. All right.
And this is indicative and active.
Indicative.
Yep.
Yeah, indicative. Yeah, indicative.
Good.
Much joy and comfort from your love, my brother, because the heart of the saint have been refreshed. This is past tense. Okay, if that technically is a passive of this is past tense, but it is past tense. It is indicative, and it is passive.
Yes, passive. Good. Have been refreshed. So again, the action's happening to the subject. The subject is hearts. The hearts have been refreshed. All right. Very good job. So notice here, as we look at these verbs, what you want to see is there anything, any kind of patterns and notice almost all of them are present, indicative, active. So what that tells us is that primarily Paul is simply making statements here as he's writing. Now, there are two or three differences. There's may become, that's subjunctive, not indicative, because that's his prayer. So he doesn't know if it's going to be answered. So there's some uncertainty. So he says, I pray that your faith may become. This is what I'm praying towards. And then verse 7, we have two past tense verbs. where Paul's saying, I have derived much joy and the saints have been refreshed through you. So he's making all of these indicative statements, and then they're based upon these past tense verbs in verse 7. All right. Now, do we see any commands here? No imperatives, right? In this passage. So Paul's not giving any commands in this particular passage or instruction. He is really just making statements. All right. All right, very good. Now, the next thing is we want to look for the pronouns. All right. I'm going to ask, let's see, is Fu Wei. Good evening. Can you help us with this one, the pronouns in this passage? And again, note the pronoun, but also note who it refers to or what it refers to. So verse 4, what do you see?
The first one, I.
And that refers to whom?
Refer to Paul.
Paul, right? Paul's the one writing.
Yeah.
Very good.
Mm.
We have another I,
next-
actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
You. I remember you.
You. And who is that referring to?
Yeah. The chat.
Yeah, who is you in this? Who's the audience here? I guess it would help if we had
Philemon.
yeah, it's
Philemon.
Philemon. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll put to Philemon, right? So that's actually the reference here, refers to Philemon primarily. All right. Any other pronouns you see here in verse 4?
I think that's all.
Okay. Yeah, we have my, that's also a pronoun,
Oh,
which also refers to Paul. Okay, so I want to note that. Okay, let's go to verse 5.
okay. So again, I.
And it's still Paul, right?
Yes.
Oops.
Okay, the next one is your.
Yes, your. And that, who is that speaking of? Referring to?
Yeah, to Philemon.
Yes.
And that you have. You have.
Yeah,
That
you.
you.
Okay, good. Now, here's an important question. In verse 4, we have you. Verse 5, we have you and your. Now, if we go back to the first 3 verses, right? Because when you have a pronoun, you look back and you see, okay, what could this be referring to? Now, here in this passage, it's very important that we say, does this you and your refer to just Philemon? Or notice there's other people mentioned here. Aphia, Archippus, and the church. Now it says the church in your house, so that your is Philemon, but we have to ask, so is the you and the your and the you, is that Philemon, or could it be Philemon and the church? How would we know that? this is where English has a problem. English does not show whether it's plural or singular, right? You wouldn't know if it's you, Philemon, or you, Philemon and the church. So I showed you guys the interlinear, didn't I? Did I show that to you guys, the interlinear Bible online? Paul, you remember that? Philip, have I shown this to you guys?
You showed it from the app, Pastor, when you were doing the app.
Yeah, when we did word studies, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here, let me show you a feature of this, because I think this is important. Because we need to, again, we're trying to identify who is Paul speaking to specifically here. Is it just Philemon? It seems to be, but how would we know that for sure? All right, well, we have to go to the original text here, and let me do this. And I think we did also look at this. Let's see, here we go. This one. All right. All right, can you guys see I've got the my internet up? Okay. So we want to go to Bible Hub. All right, and then we want to, type in the passage. Okay, we're in Philemon, right? And we want to hit, see where it says interlin here? There's these different, the second row, we want interlinear. I'm gonna have to all right, I'll just go to Philemon up here. Oh, it should be, this should give me. All right, I'm gonna have to type it up at the top. Sorry, guys. All right, so I go up to the top and I put in the specific passage, Philemon. And then that should, okay, good. And then I hit click for the chapter. So this shows the interlinear. This is the interlinear, which means simply the Greek text is in the middle. And then the English translation is below in red. Above each of these words is the Strong's number, which gives us the, when we did our word study, you hit that number and it gives you all this information about the word. Okay, hopefully you remember this. And so that's one thing you can get from the interlinear. Another is, again, you can get the literal English definition. And then another important feature is you can get the, it gives you the details about each word as far as the grammatical features. All right. So notice here, we have under Paul, I've highlighted, it says a noun, nominative, masculine, singular. Notice it says singular. Okay, so it gives us, sorry. So our interest was verse 4, right? We were wanting to know, is that you plural or singular? Because notice in verse 3, when Paul gives a greeting, well, here, he says, grace to you and peace from God our Father. Notice here, can you guys see that? Is this singular or plural?
It's a plural.
Yeah. So in verse 3, Paul's greeting is to the whole church. It's plural. Okay. Well, let's go down to verse 4. I thank the God, my God, always making mention, okay, here of you. Okay, that was that first you. Let's look. Does that say singular or plural?
Singular.
So who is Paul speaking to in verse 4?
Philemon.
Yes, since it's singular, it's just Philemon. All right. And again, your love. Okay, here's the Greek word your. Again, it's singular. All right, we keep going in the faith that you have. All right, singular. So what we'll notice is if you go all the way through Philemon, all the references in verses 4 and after are to Philemon because they're all singular. Okay, verse 11, to you, singular, to you, singular. Okay, so he's speaking directly to Philemon until we get to, I think it's verse 21, being persuaded of your obedience, again, singular. He's still speaking to Philemon. Verse 22. Now notice here, at the same time, prepare for me a lodging, for I hope that through your prayers, and notice, is your singular or plural here?
It's a plural.
So who is Paul speaking to in verse 22? Just Philemon? It's plural now. So he's speaking to not only Philemon, but the church. And then the same, your prayers I will be granted to you. You, plural. You, the church. Now, that's interesting because then look at verse 23. Epaphras greets you. It's back to singular. So he's back to speaking to Philemon primarily. Let's see. Grace of the Lord Jesus be with you at the very end, plural. Okay, so in English, I don't know how it is in Burmese or in Malay. Is there a distinction between the singular you and plural? Would you know the difference?
Yes, for Chinese, yes.
Okay. Yeah, most languages you do. English, you don't. That's one of the weaknesses of the English language is you don't. Now, in the old English, King James English, when you would say thee or thou, or thine, I guess there actually wasn't a distinction there either, now that I think about it. So in English, we don't know if it's singular or plural. Now, we do know, like for I, that's singular, we is plural, us is plural, me is singular, but the second person you is, you have to, you don't know for certain. And in this letter, this is important. All right, as you're going through Philemon, because it's a personal letter, we have to make sure, is he speaking only to Philemon or is he speaking to the church? So in this particular passage, the you is more difficult. Normally in the epistles, when Paul's saying you, it's referring to the church, but there are some epistles where there are some epistles where, like Philemon, which are individual, you know, Titus, Timothy, those are all individual. Let me see, 1 John or 2 John. Okay, there's no. So this may seem insignificant, but actually is important because you need to understand who is Paul addressing when he gives these statements. And in Philemon, at least from verses 4 through 21, it's Philemon, or 4 through, is it 20 or 21? And then verse 3, he addresses the whole church when he says grace to you. So that's what makes this an interesting letter. It is a personal letter written from Paul to Philemon, but it actually was intended to be read to the whole church. Because in parts of the letter, Paul addresses the whole church. Okay, this is extremely significant, men, for understanding this letter. Because remember, it isn't just about Philemon doing the right thing. It's about Philemon doing the right thing because of his being an example to the church and helping promote unity in the church by forgiving Onesimus. And so Paul is addressing not just Philemon, but also the whole church. All right, as he gives instruction to Philemon, he intends also for the church to know that instruction that he's giving so that the church would be helped if Philemon did the right thing. And that's why he says, Philemon, I'm praying that your faith may become effective. Effective how? Well, the whole church is reading this or hearing this letter. And so if Philemon does the right thing, his example will help the whole church towards unity. So, like I said, this may seem insignificant. Oh, I'm just looking for pronouns. Who cares, right? It's just a pronoun. Well, actually, it means something, especially in this letter, because it's revealing to us this whole issue that Philemon is, yes, addressed to one man, but at the same time, it's also to the church. Okay? And so the specific instruction is given to Philemon, but there are general statements where Paul is also, it's just kind of like the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is speaking to the disciples, but there are people around also listening. Okay? So it's the same here in Philemon. Paul he's speaking to Philemon, but he recognized, okay, the whole church is hearing this also. Okay. Questions or comments, thoughts about that? Again, just trying to help you see that even minor details can be important. Sometimes it's not as important. It's just a minor detail. All right. But we don't know that if we're not looking for things. It's like in the crime scene, the detective or the investigator may just find one little stick or piece of paper, and it may seem insignificant, but maybe later he finds a fingerprint on that piece of paper that leads him to the criminal. All right. At the time when he's collecting clues, some clues may not seem important. And often that's the case. Many clues are not that important, but there's oftentimes one or two of them that are very important, even though they may seem unimportant. And that's very much the case as we study scripture. Sometimes a single word can hold significant understanding of what the passage means. And I think here, understanding these pronouns gives us insight into that Paul's not just giving Philemon an instruction for Philemon. He's giving Philemon an instruction that will help the church or harm it if he doesn't follow through. So one important clue to knowing this is just by looking at these pronouns. Okay. All right. Well, let me get back to the notes here, unless you guys have any questions on that. I hopefully that makes sense. All right. Let's come back here and we'll give Fue a break. Thank you, brother. for your help on that. I'm going to ask Junchen if you can continue for us. Fill in, take over for your brother here. Verse 6.
I pray.
Yes. And that refers again to,
Paul.
yep, to Paul.
And the next one is the sharing of your faith.
Yes. And we saw from the interlinear, at least all the references to you and your are referring up until verse 22, refer to whom?
Philemon.
Yes. So your, again, refers to Philemon. Now, again, this would have been important if your here was plural, then we would know he's not just speaking to Philemon, but to the church. But here it is singular if we look at the interlinear. So we know that it's speaking to Philemon. Okay. Any other pronouns in verse 6?
Yes, us.
Us. Okay. And
Us.
who does that refer to?
Paul and Philemon.
Yeah. And you may ask, well, could it refer to the whole church that he's saying us, the whole church? It's possible, but again, because he just spoke, he's referred to Philemon, it's probably primarily Paul and Philemon. Again, this part of the letter is more the personal directly to Philemon. All right. Okay, any others in verse 6?
No.
Okay, how about verse 7?
Verse 7, for I have derived. The I refers to Paul.
Yes.
Much joy and comfort from your love. Your refers to Philemon.
Yes.
And the next one, my.
Yeah, my brother. So again, and here in this case, verse 7, we do have an indication of who Paul is speaking to, because he says my brother. So sometimes, even if we don't know if you or your is singular or plural, the context can help us see, in this case, at least in verse 7, and likely then in verses 4 through 7, because Paul says my brother, we know he's talking to Philemon.
Yeah.
Okay. So my refers to Paul, and then we have another
The last one.
you here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that,
Philemon.
yeah. Okay. And William, put your note. All right, good. Okay, yeah, here I just put all that down. Now, conjunctions. Let's see. Oh, let's pull this back up here. Okay, I'm going to skip this one for now just because got that in the diagram. Repetition of words. Paul, let me ask you to try this one out. Repetition of words. Again, we're looking not just for the same word, but do you see any synonyms as well, similar words?
Faith is repeated there. Yeah. And the faith that you have, the sharing of your faith. Yeah. Love as well, because I hear of your love and I have derived much joy and comfort from your love.
Here, there it is. Okay.
The phrase I followed by a verb is repeated many times. I thank, I remember, I
Okay,
pray,
yeah.
I have.
We could even just say I then, right?
Yeah. So it's,
and we just noticed that with the pronouns, we noticed that, but yeah, there's a lot of repetition of, I think I caught them all. Okay. Anything else?
Lord Jesus and Christ is mentioned twice as well in this passage.
Yeah, it's only mentioned, Jesus and then Christ. If that occurred more often, 3 or 4 times, I might note that.
Okay.
How about words that carry similar, like in verse 7?
Yeah, joy and comfort and refresh, I suppose have a somewhat related.
Yeah, joy, comfort. Yeah, they're not exactly the same, but they convey a similar idea, don't they?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I think that captures most of it here. All right, so nothing earth-shattering, but again, this is one thing to be looking for, words that are repeated. Paul, let's see, contrasts. There aren't any in this passage that I found. There are some contrasts later. I'll just show you in Philemon when Paul says, he was formerly useless to you, but now he's useful to you and to me. And then verse 16, to have him back no longer as a bondservant, but more than a bondservant, as a brother. So later we see some contrasts. Again, comparisons, there aren't any really that I saw in this passage. There is one later in verse 17. If you consider me your partner, receive him as you would receive me. That's sort of a comparison. Receive Onesimus in the same way, just like you would receive me. But again, nothing in verses 4 to 7. Lists. I don't think there are really any lists here. We do have a list earlier in verse 1, right? To Philemon, Aphia, Archippus, the church. Okay, again, that's an important list because, again, we're considering who are the recipients. And so that's one list that's mentioned. There's another list at the end of names again: Epaphras, Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, Luke. Okay, it's another list, but none in our passage here, verses 4 to 7, that I could see. Cause effect. All right, so cause effect, as we look at verses 4 to 7, I'm going to ask Pastor Philip on this one. Do you see anything in these verses that are a cause and effect, like one statement or event causing another?
I think in verse 4, I thank God and remember in prayer. Is it because? Oh,
Yeah. So when I remember, I thank my God. So yeah, that could be a cause and effect. Good. I didn't catch that one before.
yeah.
Any others?
So in verse 6 again, I think I pray that the sharing of your faith
Yeah, may become effective.
become effective.
Yeah, for the
Is it
full knowledge. Yeah, that might be a purpose. That might fall under the next one, I think.
okay?
I
Yeah.
pray this, you know, that one's a little
For the
harder.
purpose, yes, yeah.
How about verse 7? Anything there?
Yeah, I have derived much joy and comfort because the hearts of the saints have been refreshed. I think,
Yes. So the effect is I have derived much joy. The cause is the hearts of the saints have been refreshed.
have been refreshed. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And there's actually one more I see here.
Is that in verse 5? I'm not.
Verse 7. It's a little bit more
Oh,
subtle.
because
The hearts have been refreshed, and then notice that is the effect. What was the cause? Through you.
through you.
Yeah. That one's a little more subtle.
Through.
Okay. So through, in
Yes.
this case, serves as a. Now, how about the purpose result? As we look at, again, in this case, it's a little different. Cause and effect. Purpose result is the purpose or reason for something. You see anything that might fit under that?
So in verse 6, the sharing of your faith may become effective for the full, so that they may be full knowledge of every good thing in us.
Yeah, that
for
would
the
do.
sake of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, for the sake of Christ.
Yeah, for the full knowledge would be a result, and for the sake of Christ would be a reason. Answer. All right, good. Any others? Again, we're looking for a purpose, which would be a reason or a why.
So I think in verses 4 and 5, I thank God because I hear of your love and of the faith.
There you go. Good. Yeah.
Because I hear of your love and of the faith.
Exactly. So that's a reason why I thank God, because I hear of your love. That's a reason or a purpose. And then oh yeah, one more, verse 7. For I have derived, I think, is the result, or sorry, reason why Paul says I pray. I pray for this. Why? Because, or for, I've derived much comfort.
Okay.
Now, again, I think probably in the future, I'm going to combine 8 and 9, because sometimes a result, purpose, and cause effect, there's a little bit of a similarity there. So, but yeah, these capture, there's a lot of this actually, these two things in these verses. Okay, good. Let's see, let's keep going here. Thank you, Pastor Philip. Conditional clauses, if there really aren't any in verses 4 to 7. However, there is a conditional clause in verse 17. If you consider me your partner, receive him. That's one. And then verse 18, if he has wronged you, charge that to my account. So that's two. So we do see, not in verses 4 to 7, but verses 17 to 18. We see some conditional clauses. Now, going to figures of speech, here there is one. I'll just do it. He says the hearts have been refreshed. Was he speaking of the literal heart, the organ in the body? I mean, he's talking here about their soul, right? Their feelings were refreshed. Certainly, I guess their body could have been as well as a result of that, but I think he's speaking of their hearts, their emotions, their feelings, their souls, their spirit was encouraged, not just the organ that pumps blood. Okay. So that's a figure of speech that, at least that I see here. And then finally, the tone of the passage seems to be gratitude, right? I thank my God, and joy and encouragement. Much joy in my brother. All right. So those are some terms that show the tone of the passage. Okay. So again, these are some things, some specific observations we're looking at in the text that you may have already noticed. Some of them you may have noticed when you did the diagram, or you may have noticed them earlier. But in this step, we specifically write down, articulate those particular or those specific observations. Okay. So I think this step may seem sort of tedious at times, because you're looking for things, but notice you're going over the passage. No, we did it 12 times, right? For each of these types of observations, we read through the passage again, looking for pronouns. Okay. We read through the passage again, looking at the verbs. Read through the passage again, looking for cause and effect. And so this step forces us to keep reading through the text, looking for something specific. And as I said, in that process, sometimes something pops out, like, oh, I didn't notice that before. That's important. That can happen as you do this particular step. Now, before I want to do one more thing together with you guys tonight, in the time we have left, but any questions on that, or comments before we look at one more thing? All right. It's clear. Zali, you look very interested.
Clear as crystal. I think so.
You look like your heart is being refreshed as you're relaxing there.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Let me go over one more thing with you guys. I'm going to skip the word study step, but I do want to look at the second to the assignment 3.7 and just the here. So we'll go through, okay, word study. You can go. Okay, I want to talk about just again. Whoops, I went too fast. Okay. What we call the sorry about that. What we call the what, why, how, or the exegetical, I like to call it the exegetical idea of the passage. That is, okay, after all this study, after we've done the background context, the contextual flow, after we've done the diagram and these textual observations, word studies, after we've consulted resources and given much thought, you know, all of these things are meant to reveal to us the author's main idea, right? We could call it the author's main point, or the author's intended meaning or focus in the passage. And I refer to that as the exegetical idea of the passage. Or I called it earlier, the author's what, why, and how. So you can represent this exegetical idea, this main point, by answering 3 questions. All right, and each of these 3 are very important. There's the what. What is the author's main point? Okay, what is he saying? Summarize it in a sentence. Don't just say, well, the subject of Philemon 4 is gratitude. Well, okay, Paul does say, I thank my God, but you need to put that in the form of a sentence. Paul expresses gratitude for Philemon's testimony and praise for him to be a good example, or something like that. You want to have a full sentence, not just 1 or 2 words. So what is the author's main point? And then secondly, why did he make that main point? This is very important. We talk about this quite often. What is the purpose, the reason? Why does the author make that point? Not just what is it, but why does he state it? That's the context of the passage. And you need to have both. To understand the exegetical idea, you not only need to know what the author said, but why he said it. And then there's the how. So there's the what. That's the main point stated. The why he gave that point or made it. And then the third is how. And that's really, how does he develop that point? That's the outline of the passage, the structure of the passage. So as we look at Philemon 4 through 7 and ask ourselves, okay, the author's what? What is the focus here of this particular passage? All right, we noticed Paul says, I thank, that's one independent clause, and then I pray. All right. And so we identified those 2 ideas, Paul's gratitude to God for Philemon and his prayer for Philemon's response. All right, so that, I don't remember how I described it. Again, in these verses, notice that Paul, he expresses gratitude for Philemon's testimony and that he prays that Philemon's faith would be effective. And as we talked about with Philemon, knowing the whole context of the letter, the idea there is forgiveness. So the author's what we could articulate as Paul prays for Philemon to demonstrate Christian unity by forgiving, not Philemon, Onesimus. Okay. So that would just be a summary of this paragraph in one statement. Now, way back early in the exegetical process in step 3, we did paragraph summaries, but now we're sort of doing that again, but now that we're doing it having done much more study. And so we're refining that author's what. And with that, then again, we want to know, okay, this is what Paul was saying in verses 4 to 7. But the question is, why? This is just as important that we know why he said it. That's the context. All right. And so we can find that why or reason at several levels. Okay. The first might be within the passage. Okay, let me pull this. Okay, we might look for, okay, is there any reason given within the passage? And notice here, Paul says, I've derived much joy and comfort from your love. The hearts of the saints have been refreshed through you. And so we do see a particular reason being given by Paul for the for what he's saying here in these verses. Okay. And in addition to that, sometimes the reason is given within the passage itself. And we have that here, for I have derived much joy. Sometimes the reason is given in the immediate context, maybe something that the author says right before or right after. And then sometimes the reason or the why is found in the purpose of the book. Okay, so you'll have to look for this. As you're studying your text, the author makes a statement. He gives a point. And you're asking yourself, okay, why does he give that point? What is behind that? What motivates him to give that point? And to answer that question, you have to look at the passage itself and see if a reason is given there. Or sometimes you need to look at just around the passage. Or sometimes it'll have to come from the point of the book. Sometimes it's hard to find the specific purpose in that text, but knowing the purpose of the book can help you with that. And again, in this case, in Philemon, there are two aspects that help us know the why. One is seen in verse 7. Paul says, I'm praying this for you because I've derived much joy and comfort from your love, and the saints have been refreshed through you. So Paul's motivated to encourage Philemon, or praying for Philemon, that his faith may become effective, because Philemon has been an encouragement to the church. And secondly, we know that a reason for Paul's statement is the purpose of the book is Paul is appealing to Philemon to forgive, to be reconciled with Onesimus, and that will have an effect on the whole church. Okay? So we always want to answer the question, not only what does the author say, but why did he say it? And two, guys, this will help give you the application in your message, as you preach the text or teach this passage. Right? The application here we can see directly, because Paul's praying for Philemon's fellowship to be effective, because it will affect the body. In the same way, we can say, look, this is why we need to forgive one another, because it affects the entire church. And I need to forgive you, and you need to forgive me because of the impact that it has on our fellow brothers and sisters in the church. It can help unity or harm it. And so when you understand the why, that will help you to know the application of the passage. What motivated Paul to say this to Philemon? Oftentimes it can be the same motivation for us as we're teaching that passage to our hearers. So the author's why can guide us as to our why as we preach the text as well. Okay, so it can give us some insight into application. Questions on that? So basically the why, the author's why, can help us with how we may apply the passage. Okay? And in Paul's case, the why is so the saints would be encouraged and the body would grow by Philemon's example. Okay? And then finally, the how. So we have the author's what, that's his main point. The why is the reason for that main point. And then the how is simply the structure or the outline. How does he derive that point? And that would just come from the block diagram primarily. All right. And so from this block diagram, which we have over here on the right as well, we can uncover that outline. Okay, where we have two main points. I thank my God and I pray. Okay, so that is the two main points here. Paul's gratitude for Philemon's testimony, verses 4 and 5, and Paul's prayer for Philemon's response, verses 6 and 7. And then we could break down further when Paul is grateful, and then why Paul is grateful, because I hear of your love. And then the second point, I pray the sharing of your faith. We have the content of his prayer in verse 6, and then we have the reason in verse 7. All right, and we could actually even add potentially the reason, two others there in verse 6 as well. All right, so the author's how is just basically the diagram, the structure of the passage. All right, well, we covered quite a bit there. I hope most of that was review, but maybe you got some new insights as we went through that again together. And that these are the what you would need to do for your particular assignments. Going back to the beginning, what we've discussed this evening is assignment 3.5 was the textual observations, and then assignment 3.7 includes the author's what, why, how, or his exegetical idea. Okay, so you can look to those assignments. There's examples in those assignments as well to guide you with that. Okay. All right. Well, as I said, the next unit, which will start in 2 weeks, unit 4, we'll move towards the preaching stuff. You know, we'll move towards putting the sermon together, what's important in the sermon, and also how to deliver it, and talk about that. I think you guys will find that to be interesting and helpful and encouraging. I know in this first part, you know, we've been focusing in these first 3 units really on the work. You know, it's like I think at the beginning I talked about archaeologist, you know, and he's working to uncover artifacts and he's carefully exposing them, and there's a lot of work to dig without breaking these bones, and it's very tedious work. And but once you pull the bones out, now you can put them on display and learn things from them. And so that's the exciting part. There's a lot of work to get there, and it's the same in understanding and preaching the scripture. There's a lot of work in trying to understand the author's meaning, but once we grasp that, it's very exciting to think, okay, in giving this, teaching this to my hearers, and even first to me, right, and how it applies to me, there's much satisfaction, I guess, in that step of the process. What does this passage mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean to my hearers? All right, so that's where we're going to head, Lord willing, when we gather together again here in a couple of weeks, and we'll work on that, and then try to be working on your passage and putting together a message for it. And I'll talk more about that in the next unit as to if you want to put a message together from your passage and preach that message and get feedback, then I think that's the way you're really going to learn a lot as well from this class. So I'll talk more about that when we get to unit 4. Okay. Well, thank you for your patience, your diligence. Any final thoughts or questions or observations, comments? Cries of relief. Ah, hallelujah. We're finished with this exegesis stuff. I'm ready to preach now. I'm done with the studying stuff. You can exclaim praise for that as well if you're happy about that. All right, everybody's okay? Well, hey, let's pray for our brother Shulong. Thank the Lord for his birthday. Maybe Pastor Philip, would you be willing to do that? Close our time together and just maybe pray for our brother in light of his birthday today, and just pray for the Lord to bless him.
So Brother Sulang's birthday.
Yes.
And yeah, Brother Tangen also. Today is Brother Tangen's birthday too.
It is? Oh, he didn't
Yes.
say that.
Yeah.
Where is he? Oh, he's not here anymore, huh? Oh, no, there you are. Happy birthday. So 2 guys on the same day.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's pray for Tangyin as well. Maybe can you do that for both of them, Brother Philip?
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah.
Here, let me stop